fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on Kensington 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
We are at the interview part of the show. So joining me today, we have an author, Tom Mendicino. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm not sure if I said your name. Was it Mendicino or Mendicino?
Well, technically it is Mendicino, but my father was first generation, and like many first generations who were born in 1921, he decided that he needed to Americanize it. So much to my grandfather's chagrin, he changed it to Mendicino. And unlike many people of my generation, I decided that if it was good enough for my father, it's good enough for me, so I'm still Mendicino. So I go by Mendicino.
Okay, hey, just making sure. I always like to do that. Now, let's talk about Tom. So, Tom, you've written several books. Before we get into the books themselves and that, when did it start for you? Like, what made you start writing and write your first book?
How far back do you really want to go?
I was born. No. Just was there something that clicked? You know, like something that all of a sudden you were like, I got to write this, or where did it?
Well, there's a big long gap there because originally. I'm 66 years old. I'm no spring chicken, and originally I was encouraged to become a writer when I was an undergraduate at Penn, and I did a seminar with a gentleman named Jerry Mangione, who is somewhat forgotten now. But he had written a book called Monte Allegro, and which was what you now call autofiction, people call it. And he was a WPA writer, and he had quite a long and successful career. And one of the things that had always disturbed him was that while Italian Americans were very accomplished in many of the arts, painting. As a matter of fact, his nephew was the jazz musician Chuck Mangione, that there really wasn't much of a presence of Italian Americans in literature. There were John Fonte was an exception. His name is escaping me right now, but the gentleman that wrote Christ in Concrete. So I had I'm a gay man, but I had a girlfriend then. I was sort of bisexual at that time, and she had entered a seminar with Philip Roth, so she encouraged me to take a seminar with Jerry Mangione. And he thought that I had a lot of talent, and he particularly was interested in me because he was encouraging a young Italian American to write fiction. He then Penn did not have a really, although they had a few individuals like Philip Roth and Jerry Mangione there, they didn't have a really established writing program. So, but one university that did at that time in the 70s was the University of Pittsburgh. So he encouraged me to take a sabbatical, and I spent a semester at the University of Pittsburgh. And there, Mark Harris, who was the author of Bang the Drum Slowly and a whole series of baseball novels. He's best known now for the movie, which started the career of Robert De Niro. He took me under his wing, and he encouraged me to apply to the University of Denver, which had a very acclaimed MFA program at the time, and he had been in that program. So because of these two gentlemen, I began to write, and I liked writing a lot, and I wrote a novel, and they referred me to an agent, and by hook or crook, I did not like teaching. I did not like being in an MFA program. I got on a bus and hitchhiked my way across the country, and I was so full of myself when the agent suggested that I make changes before she would submit it to a publisher, I wouldn't do it. And that put the kibosh on my writing career. And so talk about being sort of fool yourself and mistakes you made way back then. So what happened at that point in time was I still loved books a lot, and I segued into a career in publishing at that point in time.
Oh.
And at that point, I met I didn't know how to type, believe it or not, which was really a handicap for being a young writer. So in those days, and I believe this is still true, in publishing, they didn't have assistants or what was then called secretaries. They would take kids from from colleges, and they would act as sort of editorial assistants to the editors, but really what you were a glorified secretary. And if you didn't know how to type, those jobs were shut down to you. And the only other way, your only other entry position into publishing was to go into sales and marketing. So I worked at a small place called the Architectural Book Publishing Company, and that place went bankrupt after a few years, and I ended up at Columbia University Press. And I had a great time there for 5 years, and I met a woman who became a really terrific friend of mine. And her name is Rachel Clayman. She is still in publishing today. She is at Crown. I believe she's title is executive editor. She is Barack Obama's editor, and she is currently working on his memoirs.
Wow.
So she did quite well, but am I rambling on too much?
This is great. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So after 5 years, though, I sort of hit a dead end, and I didn't want to be a salesman the rest of my life. And I knew that I was never going to break into the editorial side of the business. And my other mentor at Penn was a woman named Elaine Scarry. And she said to me, and I went back to her and I said, I don't know what to do with my life. And she said, you should do what I told you to do when you made that foolish decision to go to enter an MFA program, because I told you don't have the personality to go into academics. You have a big mouth and a hard head and an aggressive personality. Go to law school. So I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and spent 3 of the happiest years of my life actually in law school, because I actually loved law school more than I loved being a lawyer, although I'm very happy being a lawyer and I do like it. And so I took a very different path. But about, when was it? Maybe 20 years later. I can't remember when I published my first book anymore. But Rachel had already had quite, I can't remember, I think she was at Simon & Schuster at the time. But she had already had her first kid. I think she might have already had her second kid at the time. But she was living out in Brooklyn, and it was like a Sunday afternoon, and they still had great independent bookstores at the time. And we were spending a Sunday afternoon, walking through a bookstore, and they had all those beautiful tables laid out with all those wonderful covers. And she just looked up for me very wistfully, and she sighed, and she says, you know, I always expected that someday I would walk into one of these stores and I would look down and see a novel by Tom Mendicino, you know, the book jacket that said a novel by Tom Mendicino. And I was kind of crushed. And I just decided at that moment that, like, I love what I do, but there's nothing that would stop me from trying this and giving it a hand at this point in my life. And I started to write at that point in time. They'd already had this first sort of surge of gay literature. It was after, like, the Violet Quill and Edmund White and that whole group, and Felice Picano and Robert Farrow and all those people, and then had all their success, and that wave had come through. And there were a lot of avenues to publish short gay fiction. There were a lot of opportunities to publish short gay fiction. And I started to write short stories, and I sent them out. And, of course, there was the usual rejections at first. And then they started to get placed. And I decided to try my hand at doing a novel. And the first draft was a mess. And I showed it to Rachel, and she's nothing if not blatantly honest, and said, you know, I always knew you had a hell of a lot of talent, but this is a POS. You know, but I said, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong. She says, no. I used to work with a woman at Doubleday who's now a freelance editor. And she ain't cheap, but you're a lawyer, and you make good money, and I'm going to give her a call, and I know she's busy, and let's see if she'll take you on. And that woman's name is Casey Fuchs. And she worked with me for a year, and we turned that into something, and I then took that back, and then the hardest part, as it is for any writer, I believe, was not finding a publisher, was that finding an agent. And that was probably the most gruesome and heartbreaking, you know, oh, send me the pages, send me this, send me that, I love this, and then you wait, and then you'd hear, and then it was like, oh, this isn't for me. And finally, I sent something to an agent named Mitchell Waters, and I never heard from him. And I was just about ready to give up, and I figured, what the hell, I'm going to send it to him again. And 3 weeks later, I get this phone call from Mitchell Waters. And he says, hi, I liked those 30 pages. Could you send me the rest? And the rest was history. And that's how I became a writer.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. I think it's good for people to hear what a person goes through a lot of times to get published and to get it. And even when you got that first book done, did you feel like you had the confidence to continue writing, or did you feel like you were good enough to write? What I'm saying is, I'm trying to get at, there's a point where you feel confident enough to call yourself a writer. When did that happen for you?
I don't know if I still feel that way today, to be honest with you.
Right.
Because with every project that you do, it can be, there's some moment with it that's almost soul crushing, that you look at it and you think, oh my God, I can't believe that I have produced something this bad.
Right.
And I can't believe that anyone would ever take this seriously. So I don't know. I'm sure there are many people that feel differently, and I'm sure that there are many people who are very successful in this world that are filled with hubris and feel differently, but that person is not me when it comes to my writing.
Well, I think there's a lot of us that feel that way, but but sometimes people gain that confidence, and also now the subjects you write about. I know a lot of writers, and I know a lot of people that can do it on a commercial basis. Like they're writing books, 3 or 4 a year, and they're, it's very industrial, I want to call it, but they do it really well, and I don't think I could do that. I'm not that person, but. When you write, does the subject of the book have to be very important to you?
Yes, and that's why I don't think I could do that either. I have never been. I don't know, particularly since. I have been with the same publisher since the beginning of my career, and this is the first time I'm going in a very different direction now. And my former publisher, I love them very much. It's just that their brand is very different from the kind of work that I want to do now, which is a very much darker, more noir type of material than I had done previously. The last book that I wrote, The Boys from 8th and Carpenter, was sort of a beginning of a turn on the road, and I enjoyed working in that sort of genre and wanted to really sort of dig deeper into that. And that just is simply not the type of book that Kensington Publishing does. I don't know if I were to go when I go to a different house, whether they would be the type of publishing house that would want to do a multi-book contract. I don't know if I could work under the type of deadline that having a multi-book contract would require. I work as a lawyer. I still do. It's very demanding. I'm also a healthcare lawyer. So I have to say that in the last 4 months, I have probably worked longer hours and more days than I have in the last 10 years. If I were working under a deadline right now to publish, to put out, let's call it product under a deadline, I would probably go to the top of my 4-story house and jump off the roof.
Yeah.
So, COVID has really, I'm very thankful that I am gainfully employed and the work is extraordinarily interesting what I'm doing now. But it would, my life does not accommodate the idea of, working on that kind of strict deadline to produce a book on the kind of schedule that, doing that kind of, I don't want to call it assembly line because that sounds like I'm making a pejorative remark, or I'm being pejorative, but putting books on a regular schedule like that. That kind of time commitment, I can't make that time commitment, and I would not be able to make that time commitment until such time that I would retire.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's meant for some people, obviously, but not all, that's for sure. Now, with each one of your books, when you write them and people read them, is there something you want to get out that you want that reader to get out of the book? Is it more than the story?
It's funny because I don't. I'm sort of like I'm thinking of this. I'm being facetious when I say this because I happened to pick up the New Yorker last night, and there's a review, and it's almost like an overview of her entire career of Joyce Carol Oates, who happens to be, obviously, I have not read all of her work. I don't know anybody who could read all of her work because she's so prolific. Probably take a lifetime to read all of her work, but she's written across so many genres. I'm almost like Joyce Carol Oates, and each of my three major works certainly does genre hop. So my first book, and the book that I'd say that I'm best known for, because it's the book that has sold the best. It's the book that really established my reputation as a queer writer and in the queer community. It was a Stonewall honor book, my first Lambda Award nomination, and gave me some kind of, not stature, but gave me some recognition in that community. It was called Probation. And what was unique about that book, and it was anything but, people thought, because it was a first novel, that it was, autobiographical, or, as I've used this reference before, auto-fiction, and it certainly was not, because it was a book about an individual who was outed in his early middle age because he was caught doing a salacious act in a men's restroom in North Carolina and was kicked out of his home by his wife of 10 years. I am one of those rare individuals who is, I'm 66, and I mentioned a girlfriend at Penn before, but that was not really serious. I've never really been in the closet. I was kind of lucky because I was one of those extremely effeminate young boys that I don't believe my parents had any, they never had any indication that I would ever be anything but gay. So I did not really have any kind of traumatic coming out experience. I think my brief experience with heterosexuality came as a shock to them, as a matter of fact. But I've never been in the closet at work, which in the late 70s, early 80s was kind of unusual. I'm sitting downstairs from me right now is my husband, now legally married husband that I've been with for 41 years. But this actually was based on an experience of somebody that I met very, very briefly while I was in law school in North Carolina. And like most of my books, with the exception of the young adult book I wrote, was I get my ideas from books of somebody that I might meet that triggers my imagination. And this was based on his, very, very loosely based on his story. And what people took from it, which I got this enormous reaction, and it was very, 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 very touching to me, this entire community of men who had lived entire lives of being someone who they were not. And these men had been married, had had children, and whether through some traumatic event like the protagonist of this book, or for some other reason, had come out of the closet. And the coming out of the closet was not an easy event. and this book was and still is meaningful to them. I still get what is called, I guess, fan mail about it, a lot of appreciative mail about it, and to know that that book has impacted people and touched them in many ways, that really means a lot to me. Also, that book meant something. What I wanted to do in that book was I always wanted to do something for my own parents. So the parents of the protagonist in that book, their stories are my own parents' stories. And in my own way, I wanted to memorialize them in a small way, in sort of vignettes. I would like it I'm not going to be able to ever do what my friend Chris Castellani has done in his magnificent trilogy. He took his parents' life and wrote a trilogy of novels about their immigrant experience. And I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in the not the classic Italian American immigration experience, but the one that the story of immigrants that emigrated after the Second World War. It's really terrific. I also put in a plug for his latest novel, Leading Men, which is a story, a novelization of the relationship between Tennessee Williams and Frank Marlowe. That's also a terrific novel. So just putting in a plug for him there. So that's what I wanted to accomplish with my first novel. And with my second novel, second and third, the second novel really began as a trilogy, and it's called. It was first put out as a series of 3 novellas, and it was originally conceived as a young adult novel, and it is because of the sexual content was too raw, that there's also a category that librarians call new adult, which allows for more explicit sexual material in it. But when it finally came time for Kensington to market it for awards material, I found myself being labeled a romance writer. So I was nominated for a Lambda Award for Best Male Romance, which I never thought that I would be a bodice ripper. But that book is called Stealing Home. And that is a book that's actually my favorite book. And that is probably the closest book to my own life. And that is the story over 3 summers based 2 years apart about a relationship between a young man who is sort of close to me, who is sort of a smart-ass, smart-alecky kid who finds himself in an unexpected relationship with a very, very talented, unexpectedly sensitive, abused kid who is got a very who is about to embark on a career as a minor league baseball player. And did you just recently have John Michelson on as a guest on your show? I saw.
Yeah, I think he was on. I think it aired yesterday. I interviewed him about a week ago. Yeah,
and he wrote a really, really lovely review of that book. It was, and that was really touchy. And he published it on Christmas, so it was a really nice Christmas present for me. So
is that really important? Like when someone you know as a writer,
yes, it is,
said something good about what you do?
Yes, it does. That makes you feel incredibly validated.
Huh. Yeah,
and
I can see that.
Yeah, it made me feel very, very, very validated when somebody wrote something like that about that. The last book that I wrote then that came out was a book called, and is led to where I am today. It was called The Boys from Carpenter, and it's probably the book of how you found me, because that is what has led me into what I'm doing now, which is the subject matter of noir. And it really had, I wanted to write something. I've lived in Philadelphia since I came here to go to college. I live in an area of Philadelphia called South Philadelphia, which is rapidly gentrifying, but is where Italian Americans came to settle here. And I had an experience here that was rather ugly while I was out canvassing for Obama during the 2008 primary, which made me very, very angry. Sort of a minor reflection of what's going on now here with the protests here. And that is what inspired that book. There is a scene in that book where the main protagonist goes in to buy a pack of cigarettes at a lottery dispensing convenience store on primary day, and has an encounter with the woman running the lottery ticket that actually happened in real life. And that's what inspired me to write that book. And how it ended up becoming a crime thriller noir was completely generic. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it ended up with the book opening up with becoming a story about two brothers and the bond between them, and the younger brother, who was a prosecutor, coming to the older brother's house and finding a leak in the floor and opening up a freezer chest and finding a young boy's frozen body in there. But I've never enjoyed writing anything more than that. And it just sort of opened up. I didn't want to be sort of pigeonholed as necessarily just doing weird things. I love to plot things. I love to let my imagination run wild. And that's how I've ended up doing what I'm doing now.
How do you develop those types of characters when you have the two brothers and you've got kind of the idea of what story you're writing and what's going to happen? How do you actually create their characters and develop those characters, because they're fictional? So how do you know when one person's going to react in another way? And you see, it's unusual for me because I write from things that have happened, so I take it from what I get as an information. So you create this. Is it from people you meet, people you know, or you just kind of go with it, like a fly by the night? Like how does that happen?
This sounds kind of weird, and I don't really. I don't want to sound like I feel kind of almost odd saying this, because I don't want to sound like I'm self-inflating, but if I went downstairs and you asked my husband this question, he would tell you that I probably have the most overactive imagination of anybody that he's met. And I don't mean that in the sense that I have an overactive imagination, in the sense that I could sit around and write George Martin type of fantasies about dragons and things like that, or science fiction. I'm the kind of person that I sit and people often find this irritating about me. I will sit somewhere and, for example, go to a restaurant or go be anywhere, and I will fixate on somebody that is a complete stranger, and I will find something about them that fascinates me. They could fascinate me in a way that I find very attractive or find extremely irritating. It could be something about a piece of clothing they're wearing. It could be something about a tick they have. And I've done this ever since I was a child. It would drive my mother crazy. It would drive my father crazy, my sister crazy, my husband crazy. It drives my coworkers crazy. And I can go from there, and I can begin to extrapolate to that until within 30 minutes, I can create an entire history for that person. And I've done that for my entire life. I don't know why I've done that, but it's just something, and I don't know that it's a gift. Maybe it's a psychosis. I mean, it very well could be. I mean, I am in therapy. I've been in therapy a long time. Yeah,
there you go.
But I do, I find other people to be endlessly fascinating, and sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, but always to be endlessly fascinating. And everybody has a story, and if I don't know it, I will make it up for myself. And so it really is very easy for me to create characters. And one of the issues that I have with my writing is I often am in a situation where I am never at a loss for characters in anything that I write, because in any manuscript that I have done, I have had to cut characters because there are too many of them. And for example, my editor, Kensington, John Sconamelia, and Casey, and who I'd mentioned before, who I had worked with on Probation, and this incredibly talented reader, Olivia, at my agency, Branton Hoffman, on the manuscript that is now being shopped. Each of those individuals can tell you, they can list you 3 buckets of characters that said, like, this is a great person, but this is too many. People are losing track of this many voices.
For me, with current times, or when things are really kind of, you might say, dark in essence, COVID-19 protests, nutball president, you got all this stuff going on that's really effective.
Nutball president.
And I'm using that as a nice term.
Please.
But when you
aren't you tuning in tonight? I don't know when this will be broadcast, but aren't you tuning in to see him up there with his face up there, mounted with the great 4? Or what is it? How many on Mount Rushmore? I guess there's 4, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Unbelievable.
I have no interest in him. I'm actually up in the Canadian studio, and when we watch the news and we see things going on, it's just crazy. It's just so crazy. But with all of this going on, this encompassing thing, and being hit on both ends, being that you write fiction and being that you're creating so much of the character and the story and everything, is this what leads you into writing noir or darker, more sinister sort of feeling in your book? Is this kind of what feeds into your? Do you feed off your feelings?
No. This long predates anything that is going on with Trump or COVID or I have always been inclined to as a child, I was a huge horror movie fan, particularly of the old Universal horror movies. And I'm not a pessimistic person, but I have always had a great fascination with the dark. I think probably if you ask me my favorite movies, that they're things like I don't want to write horror particularly, but I do. As a child, I was always drawn to things that I was never drawn to comedy. I was never drawn to musicals. I was always drawn to things that were
suspense.
I guess, yeah, the macabre. I guess. I mean, that's not noir, but I guess there's some relationship to it. And when you think about what noir is and what it really means, it really is the essence of not being able to establish any sense of what is right. There's sort of a lack of a moral center, I guess, is what it is, and that there's something psychologically malignant. And I don't know whether or not. Well, you asked me earlier, before we got on air, you asked me, whether or not there were any subjects that I did not want to talk about, and I told you, no, my life is an open book. And so, I mean, I will be honest with you, okay? I grew up in a very working class neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And I was very, very fortunate that I had very protective parents, because it was a very difficult childhood, because I was, they used to call me Thomasina. And not my parents, the neighborhood kids. And it was the type of place where you got the crap beat out of you just for being different all of the time. And I will say that, does that damage you in a way? Of course, that is going to impact you in some way, that regardless of what your parents do to protect you, there is always going to be some residue or remnant of feeling some level of discomfort in the world, and that feeling that the world is not a safe and not a welcoming place, and that will never quite go away. And, you build up barriers to protect yourself, and that is that having, I grew up and you learned how to become tough. And I will say that, my life changed dramatically when my voice changed and people began to perceive me differently. And life became a lot easier. But that seed of that child who was bullied and who was tormented and whose parents had to go knock on people's doors and say, if your kid ever does this to my kid again, I will. And we're on radio, so I won't, I will keep the language down. Yes, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that's probably what draws me to the world of to the dark world of noir. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah,
to you?
of course, and it sort of is, kind of what I'm saying in a sense that there are certain things that happen in your life that lead you into that direction of the darkness. Do you want to fix things in your story? Like at the end of the story, is it going to end happy? Do you want to turn it around, or do you want it just to keep going?
No, actually. It's interesting. Like, I mean, I don't know if you, for example, at the end of, I would encourage everybody who's listening in this to go out and buy a copy of The Boys of Eighth and Carpenter, as well as the other books too, please. But at the end of The Boys of Eighth and Carpenter, it's a very ambiguous ending. And is it fixed? Well, it's interesting. Maybe for one of the brothers, it may be fixed in a way, but for another brother, it's certainly not. But, there is always this, with noir, I believe there's always a moral ambiguity. With the book that is currently being shopped at this point in time now, certainly nothing is fixed at the end. There is that same ambiguity at the end. Somebody does, there are issues, some problems are resolved, but does that mean that they are resolved to the fact that there is a neat solution and that, for example, crime doesn't pay and that there is a moral ending? No, that will never happen in anything that I write. The book, one good thing about COVID here is that, that's a horrible thing to say. There's no good things about COVID. One good thing about being stuck in the house when I'm not working is that even though I'm working very long hours, I've got nothing else to do when I'm not working. So I'm currently working on a manuscript that I've never completed a manuscript this quickly in my life. And in this manuscript that I'm currently working on, that is not complete, again, the resolution will be morally ambiguous. But no, I don't think things ever work out, things ever turn out right, or things ever correct themselves. I don't think that that's the way life turns out. I don't think that's the way the world is. I don't see it that way. No.
No happily ever after.
No.
No. Well,
I did write. I actually, but I mean, not in these novels. I would say that in the young adult book I wrote, there's sort of a happy ever after. I thought that the readers of that book, that the book is called Stealing Home, that if you invested time in those two young men's story, that you certainly deserved. People would want and deserve the happily ever after. And even in Probation, it's not it's not a happily ever after, but he achieves a level of peace of mind. But those books are not noir. They are definitely not noir.
No, they're family thrillers.
Yeah, that's actually good. Yes.
Oh, that's funny. So you just want to keep on writing now until you can't anymore, type thing? Is that sort of something that you enjoy doing?
Well, that is the plan. I mean, the plan is that this is something that for me to keep me well engaged after I no longer practice law. And I don't know how long I will continue to practice law. It's something that I still enjoy, but it really is something that you need to be at the top of your game to do really, really well. And, I keep seeing younger people that are very energetic, that are snapping at your heels, and they're just a little bit quicker than you are, and they're a little more technologically adept, and they've got a lot more energy. They don't necessarily have the wisdom and experience, but and also too, I don't want to be one of those professionals that is hanging around and people are saying, why is he still here? So it's a belt. I mean, but on the other hand, I'm just 66, and that's, a lot. Most professionals don't retire at 66. But the day is coming soon.
Spring chicken. So now,
not quite.
No,
old hen.
Tough old bird. Yeah. No. So now, where are people going to find you? Where do you have a website that people can come and find out more about you?
Yeah, it's www.tommendicino, Mendicino, books.com.
Fantastic. So we'll have that on our website. I'll have a link to your books as well. So hopefully people will jump in and search out. I mean, it's very, very interesting conversation. There's it's nice to talk to other writers like that. So
thank you. I really appreciate you searching me out and finding me. And I mean, like I say, particularly since I have not been particularly active in the writing game in the last couple of years, so your reaching out to me was a very, very pleasant surprise when I've been immersed in COVID. So I have really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll see you.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.